This is the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast, a production of the European Association of Professional Hypnotherapists. That's eaph.ie.
And a very warm welcome to you to session number 25 of the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast. I'm your host, Aidan Noone. Want to learn the secrets of sports hypnosis? What does being in the zone mean? Discover how you too can learn how to train your mind and how finding your own optimum emotional level is directly linked to you achieving your optimum and best sports performance. What's the role of muscle memory and how training and performance rehearsal are the key ingredients in you achieving your very best. From sports hypnosis to key advice for aspirant professional hypnotherapists. Today's podcast is jam-packed full with rich, valuable and useful knowledge. Listen as Aidan Sloan imparts his expertise in his practice as a professional and ethical hypnotherapist on today's podcast. Aidan Sloan, welcome to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast.
Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
And that's wonderful to have you indeed. And Aidan, you're based probably in the heart of Dublin. Would that be correct?
That's right, yes. Yeah, I just off Fitzwilliam Square.
Right.
I always had this idea that I wanted to be in Dublin 2 or Dublin 4. In my previous life, I always worked in that area. It's an area I'm familiar with.
Mm-hmm. And what was your previous life, Aidan?
My previous life, I was in the creative industry, marketing, advertising, design.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Okay.
Fell into it by accident. And actually, it's that business that, again, purely by accident, that brought me around to hypnotherapy. It was never something I planned, but I can actually see parallels from being a good creative consultant, and there's a very similar skill set that I brought into the therapy environment.
Right.
I was good in that business at going out, listening to clients, listening to them tell me about their service, their product, the message they wanted to get out, the audience they wanted to reach. And then I would interpret how best to get that message out and deliver whatever was necessary to them. So it's a very similar qualities that a good therapist needs to be able to listen, to interpret, and help the client achieve the outcomes they want.
Excellent. So you've actually preempted my next question. I was going to ask you, when did you know you wanted to be a hypnotherapist? Well, thank you for that.
Well, it's funny. It's how that came about was I had one specific client, and I'll try and keep this as short as possible. I was forever pulling rabbits out of a hat for her. I was forever saying, if you want...
So you're a magician also?
Oh, I'm telling you. I can be very persuasive, not a magician. No, what happened was this girl would never sign off on time. And I'd say to her, look, the printer needs 2 days for this. And she wouldn't sign off on the artwork until the day before it was needed. And I was always somehow managing to achieve deadlines for her. But one day we had this job and I said, we need 4 days. The printer needs 4 days. Your event is on 6 o'clock Friday. The printer needs this signed off before lunchtime Monday. She signed off Wednesday afternoon. Jeez. We simply didn't have time to deliver. So she had an event on Friday, 6 o'clock. There was no brochures there, no printed literature there. So I got a phone call from this person screaming down the phone at me, using all sorts of obscenities. And I eventually said, stop talking. Don't ever ring me and talk to me like that again.
Yeah.
And I hung up. And I remember for the weekend thinking, is this what I want to be doing for the rest of my working life? So the printer came in to me on Monday morning to apologize. And I said, Dave, you have nothing to apologize for. You made it clear you needed 4 days. She gave you 2. You did your best. And he said, that's why I'm getting out of the business. And I said, oh, why? What are you going to do? And he said, I've trained as a Reiki master. Now, I had never heard of Reiki and I hadn't a clue what it was. So when he explained to me, I was looking at him funny and thinking, seriously? That's what you're going to make a living doing? And he was very polite about it. When I look back, I think I was very rude. But he explained, he said, my family's a bit like that. We're all a bit alternative. My brother's a hypnotherapist. And I always thought hypnosis was some sort of voodoo gift that somebody was born with, And he said to me, no, you can train. There's a training school in Cork, and they train in Dublin as well. So I looked into this, and it just made so much sense to me, because when I left school first, I wanted to study psychology. And I did. I started in UCD, but got very disillusioned with it. But the interest was still there all these years later. So when I looked at it, and I looked at the hypnosis, and you can learn to hypnotize people. And then I looked into it's more about therapy than the hypnosis. And I looked at all the counseling and therapy that was involved with the training course. And suddenly a light switch turned on, and I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And this is my exit strategy for the creative business. And 2 years later, I started up my hypnotherapy business.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think, Aidan, that the field of hypnotherapy has above the other available therapies? What is so special about hypnosis and the therapy done in hypnosis?
I don't want to be controversial here, because I want to show as much respect to anybody who's working in the mental health profession.
Yeah.
If I was to sum it up, I suppose, and I'm open to correction here, hypnotherapy is the only therapy that is negotiating directly with the emotional state. So the shift happens at an emotional level rather than a conscious level. And I used to have the office I'm in, it used to be four offices on the top floor of the building, and one of them was a psychotherapist straight across the hall from me. And he used to say to me, if he got stuck with a client of his, he'd refer them across to me, and he'd say to me, Aidan, once I send them to you, I know I'm never going to see them again.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. And actually, I know we're going to move on to my specialist area of sport. I have a story I can tell you that a client gave me or said to me. And it was his explanation of his experience that I actually now use to explain to people the difference between sports psychology and sports hypnosis. Again, if I'm jumping ahead.
No, that's fine. Well, you can go ahead and explain that now if you wish.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
This guy came to me, a professional sportsman, and he said to me, he said this to me after a few sessions. He said, Aidan, my management company brought in a sports psychologist, and I'd go meeting this man, and everything he'd say to me was spot on. And I'd leave these meetings and I'd walk away saying, I've got this. And then I go back into competition, and all of the old habits would come flooding back.
Yeah.
But he said, when I started working with you on sports hypnosis, it's the difference between knowing right from wrong and feeling right from wrong. And that, I believe, sums up not just sports hypnosis, but hypnotherapy in general. Because any hypnotherapist knows what it's like to see the profound emotional change that hypnotherapy will bring about in a client very, very rapidly. And you're giving people genuine hope very, very quickly. And that's the beauty of our jobs.
What I'm getting from you is that, you know, this almost the seat of the motivational factor within lies within the emotions. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. You're creating shift at an emotional level.
Excellent. Now, okay, we'll get back to the sports in just momentarily.
Yeah, sure.
But for your, as we may say, for your sins, you're also the chairperson of the CHPA. Tell us about who the CHPA is.
Well, I was the chair of the CHPA.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
I'm no longer chair. The CHPA is, like your own organisation, a professional body that looks to promote the profession of hypnotherapy and holds our members to the highest standards of ethics and professionalism, which is a mirror of what your own body does.
Indeed.
We were set up specifically so that we're not aligned with any one training school. And it was to be an independent body that we don't want to be seen to be linked to any one school. And that's why in its early days, the CHPA was set up, because the association had been specifically linked in a previous life to one specific training school.
Yes.
We leave it there.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And indeed, the EAPH is quite similar in terms of the professional aspect of promoting hypnosis, and it's the professional body and the ethics and all of that is really, really important.
Absolutely.
And again, the independence. Indeed. That's very, very true. Now, the sports hypnosis, Aidan.
Yeah.
Now, I've been looking as part of my research on your website. It's very, very full website, lots of information there, and you give various headings with regard to, you know, the focus on sports hypnosis, the optimum performance level. Maybe you just tell us a little bit about sports hypnosis, and specifically, say for example, if we take somebody who is a golfer and they come along to you and they say, look, I want to improve my golfing. What do you do with them?
Okay, well, it's a very similar approach to any sport, and there's certain areas that we look at, and the beauty of sports hypnosis is there's no structure, there's no order that you have to look at the different areas. The main areas that I would cover is the mind-body connection, as you just mentioned, optimum emotional level, looking at limiting beliefs, mental rehearsal, and then the thing that I started to see, the thing that I didn't expect when I started specializing in sports hypnosis, is the everyday baggage that people don't realize they're bringing into competition. And, you know, when I started out, I'd say 70% of what I was doing wasn't relating specifically to sport. It was the everyday baggage. But, like, I'll go through each of those headings, you know, just to give you an idea of the areas that I look at and I help people to examine within themselves. Now, let me say, first of all, sports hypnosis, it's not just for the elite. Anybody who is competing, basically what I'm helping people to do is to train the mind for the competitive environment. And it doesn't matter what level you compete at, anybody can benefit. Now, it's not going to turn an 18 handicap golfer into Tiger Woods. It will help that 18 handicap golfer be the best that they can be by examining the mind-body connection, the optimum emotional level, limiting beliefs, and mentally rehearse. I would say to people, how often do you train? How many hours a week between practice on the driving range, practice on the putting green, and playing a round of golf? And some people might play 2 rounds of golf a week, being the driving range, putting green for a few hours. So they're saying maybe 12 to 15 hours. And I say, well, how many hours do you spend training your mind? And they'll say,
Interesting.
I don't.
Yeah.
And I could nearly say that to every athlete, every sports person who comes into me, and they don't spend time training their mind. So
one thing, Aidan, if I may interject, as I say, I read is that from your website, what you train for is what you take into competition. That was a very striking statement.
yes, and that's the mental rehearsal. You mentally rehearse what you want to experience in competition. And I say to people, look, you don't do it when you're under pressure. You sit at home on your sofa or your armchair and you relax, and then you mentally rehearse what you want to happen in competition. And I had an experience of that myself. At this stage, I'll say many years ago, and leave it at that. When I was 14, and I wish I knew back then what I was doing. When I was 14, I had a personal best long jump of 5 meters 42. And that summer, I won all but one of the competitions I entered. And I would regularly go out and put in 6 jumps of between 5 meters 30 and 5 meters 40. I was like a metronome. I was that consistent. 14 strides, jump. And the first competition, the following season, the first competition I went out to, it was a school's competition. Now, the schools did their age grading according to school year, which was different to clubs that use calendar year. So in this competition, there was guys who, from a club point of view, they would have been graded as a year older than me. So I didn't know what to expect. So after the first round, one of the judges with a clipboard, he announced, okay, we have a leader after round 1, Aidan Sloan, with a jump of 5 meters 32. And in my head, I was thinking, normal service resumed. Until the end of round 2. Okay, we have a new leader with a jump of 5 meters 72. Now, I couldn't tell you that person's name. In that moment, my head exploded. 572. That's 30 centimeters, a foot longer than my personal best, and 40 centimeters longer than my best jump on the day. And I started to panic. 572, 572, 572. And then suddenly this competitive character in me came out, and I went, okay, 572. What do I have to do to jump 572? And I walked away. I don't know if anyone listening knows where the old athletics track was in UCD. And I walked down to the far end of the long jump runway. And I closed my eyes and I started to imagine. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I went 572, 572. What do I have to do to jump 572? Now, you can't see the physical action that I was doing, but I have to be lower on the board. I have to be stronger in the air. And I have to hold my extension longer. Lower on the board, stronger in the air, hold my extension longer. And I repeated that over and over and over. And the next time they called my name, I didn't hear my name being called. Somebody had to come and tap me on the shoulder to get my attention.
You were focused.
I was in trance.
Yeah.
I had put myself into trance. And that is, you've made a very good point there, because any sports person when they get in the zone, they're in trance. They're in a state of hypnosis.
And
But what I
think,
did, just to finish that
yeah,
story,
yeah, sure.
my name was called. I went down to my mark, run up, took a jump. It was measured 572. The next round, 572. Now, I came second in that competition to a jump of 576. And it's all these years later, I look back and I say, why didn't I say 580? you know, and I have so many instances of this mind-body connection. I remember I worked with a lady, a swimmer, and I can't remember what event she did, but her personal best was 1 minute 10. And at the start of the season, the coach said to her, okay, by the end of this season, I want you to bring your personal best down to 106. And she came to me, she did her sessions, and we focused on that 106 during the sessions. We created the mental rehearsal of finishing her race, looking up at the clock and seeing 106. She went out, the first swim meet of the season, looked up at the clock, 105.99. She was drugs tested straight away for her PB having been dropped so much. I could tell you so many stories of people coming for sports hypnosis, setting themselves a target, and the body actually listening to what they're actually putting into the subconscious mind and paying attention to what they mentally rehearse for. And I say to people, it's not about rehearsing when you're in that moment surrounded by stress and tension. It's about rehearsing when you're not under pressure, so that you have given your mind some new information to take into competition.
And that what you say therein is so valuable to people listening to this podcast. And another point I was going to make earlier is that, we're constantly going in and out of trance. And let's hope that the trance that we're going in and out of is a good trance, and that it's in motivating and enriching our lives. But oftentimes, we sometimes go into that, let's say, less helpful trance, we'll put it that way. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. And that's one of the key factors that I work into my sports hypnosis. It's identifying. Sports psychologists talk about the optimum performance level. I have turned that into the optimum emotional level. Now, first of all, during the therapy, I have some exercises which I do that I help the individual identify the optimum emotional level for competing for them.
Yeah.
And the thing that hit home to me when I was learning about this was, I remember being in a rugby changing room before a match, and the coach giving the team talk, and he wanted to rile everybody up, to work them into a frenzy, so that when they ran out onto the pitch, they were prepared to run through a wall. Now, I knew from my athletics days that was not my optimum performance level or my optimum emotional level. I had to be very calm, in the zone, and know that I could rely on muscle memory when I got onto the pitch. Now, I did have teammates who would want to put their fist through a door before running out onto the pitch, but that was never my optimum emotional level. So what I do now is, with everybody I work with, I help them find their own optimum emotional level.
Yeah.
And teach them to trigger it and when to trigger it, because that's hugely important. Imagine a rugby player starting to work themselves into a frenzy maybe the night before a match.
Yes.
How much emotional energy are they burning and using up? that they could rely, if they can save energy, what will the last 15 minutes of a match be like if they have conserved more energy than their opponents? So I will teach people what is their optimum emotional level. We help discover it between the two of us. I teach them that trance and when to go into that trance. I teach them self-hypnosis, as we all do, but I teach them the right moment for them, whether it's when they go into the changing room or whether they're leaving the changing room. And I always ask people, like with a golfer, it's that moment when you put your hand on the club in the bag. For team sports, whether it's football, GAA, hurling, rugby, basketball, whatever it is, just take a moment before you step over that white line to remind your subconscious, okay, I'm in the zone. And whatever sport and whatever is the right time for the individual, I don't dictate to them. I facilitate them finding what is right for me and using that. And then again, when you're not under pressure, don't wait till competition. Mentally rehearse when you're at home on the sofa so that you have something to take into competition.
So what I'm getting from you, Aidan, is that all of this mental rehearsal is done almost in a contemplative, quiet, focused trance state.
Yes. So you practice what you want to do when you go into competition. It's just like I relate it to you go to your local running track and you practice doing what you do on the track. So you spend hours training on the track so that when you go into competition, you've developed the muscle memory. So do the same with your brain so that the neural pathways are established when you get into competition.
From watching your material or watching and reading your material, you gave an example there of where somebody was training and they had a coach, and the coach was doing their coaching, and they were only doing, say, training for, say, it was necessary to do a 7-hour marathon or something.
No, I know what you're talking about there. I know the incident that you're talking about. And that was it's okay. It was me explaining my professionalism. This individual was training for a triathlon that was going to take 12. He wanted to break, it was the full Ironman distance, and he wanted to do it in 11 and a half hours. And his coach only ever let him train for 7 hours. So whether that would be a 2-hour run and a 5-hour cycle or 1 hour swim and a 6-hour cycle, he only ever trained for 7 hours. Now, I knew in my heart and soul that unless his body had actually trained for 10, 11, 12 hours, he had conditioned his body to only expect to have to perform for 7 hours. But he was paying a professional coach, and I was not going to interfere with that relationship, even though in my heart and soul, I knew if he had only trained himself to be in the zone for 7 hours, his brain was going to be conditioned to switch off. And that's what happened. And he was doing well up to 7 hours, got off the bike, started to run the marathon, and his body just shut down because it was conditioned to shut down after 7 hours. And somebody who was expecting to run a marathon in 3.5 hours actually took 5 hours. And he said it was eventually lamppost to lamppost, just struggling to get home. But the point of that story was really the physical training he was doing was only for 7 hours at a time.
And so, he needed to do that extra hours for it to be stuck or to be embedded, as it were, in muscle memory.
Exactly, yeah. His body needed to be used to doing that amount of work. Is the biggest unfair advantage in rugby is the haka.
Yeah.
So the New Zealand team are given permission to perform their haka, and with all of the emotion, what it represents in tradition and to their country, the pride in the black jersey, everything they have. And the opposition is told, you have to stand there and do nothing. So the All Blacks are, and the other Maori countries are given the opportunity to absolutely trigger their optimum emotional level, while the opponents have to stand there
And just watch.
and figure or trigger fear. Now that to me is the most unfair way to start a rugby match.
Oh, they know what they're at.
Oh, absolutely they do. Absolutely. And I think it is an unfair advantage. I know it's tradition, but limiting beliefs are so important for sports performance. And, even little things like, I couldn't do that. I always give the example. And it's not too long ago that medicine and science believed and sent out the message that a human body is not capable of running a mile under 4 minutes. And so many people tried and tried and tried, and they were never able to break that 4-minute barrier until Roger Bannister came along.
Yeah.
And he broke that 4-minute barrier. A few weeks later, an Australian called John Landy came along, broke that barrier. And then within a year, it was a standard for top-class middle distance runners. So once one person changed that belief, it became standard for everybody else. And that's one of the things that I work really hard at for individuals who come to me for sports hypnosis. If there is any limiting belief, part of the therapy is to actually break that down. To actually say, well, what is that belief that's holding me back? And can I change that? Now, every hypnotherapist is doing the same thing with whatever a client presents to you with. It's changing that limiting belief and allowing people the freedom to actually choose a better outcome.
And you also, with regard to setting goals, you also mentioned that in other words, to set realistic short-term goals. Speak to that if you can, please.
Again, that's a standard thing. It's NLP chunking down.
Yeah.
There's no point in somebody, let's say, I go back to the golf analogy. An 18 handicapper saying, I won't be happy till I'm playing off single figures. I would say, well, okay, set yourself a target of 16. Achieve that. Then let's see if we can get to 14. And work down, set realistic goals rather than setting goals that in the short term you're going to fail and be disheartened. So set yourself a goal that you can achieve, and it will continue to encourage you to keep trying.
So basically breaking it up into small components.
It's chunking down, I think it's called in NLP.
Yeah. Now, you have a very interesting explanation for a big word, and the big word is neuroplasticity. Tell us about that.
Yeah, neuroplasticity, our neural pathways in the brain are never fixed. Neural pathways are constantly evolving. And when we're born, we have very few neural pathways established. With the ones to keep us alive, to keep your heartbeat going, breathing, digestion. But then as we grow and we learn motor skills, the free-floating nerve cells in the brain connect to create a neural pathway to connect whatever part of the brain manages this motor skill that we're learning to the central nervous system. And the more we repeat this action, the stronger the neural pathway comes. But we can change those neural pathways. And again, I go back to mentally rehearsing.
Yeah.
Your brain won't change what it is doing until you give it some new information. So I say to people, even though you don't believe you can achieve an outcome, allow yourself to imagine it and at least let the brain know the direction you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And the more you mentally rehearse, that's back to the mentally rehearsal.
Yes.
The more likely the brain is to form a new neural pathway so that when you get into competition, the pathway is established and we can allow the old ones to break down.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And very often these neural pathways that I'm talking about, they're not necessarily specifically related to muscle memory. It may be nerves, it may be anxiety, it may be not able to sleep the night before competition. So we cover all the bases and we identify where we need to break down a neural pathway that is being established that isn't helping,
Mm-hmm.
and to look to build a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And the way to start building new ones is by imagining.
Mm.
And it may sound very simple, but if you look at some of the research that's going on now with virtual reality,
Uh-huh.
and what is happening in some studies in America where nerve cells in the body that they thought were dead, paraplegics actually starting to regain control of bowel movements and things like that, just by wearing a virtual reality mask for an hour a day and triggering the imagination. But as hypnotherapists, we know that that's what hypnotherapy and visualization has been doing for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So the imagination, the mind doesn't know the difference probably between reality and what's in the imagination, what can be imagined.
Absolutely. Here's the way I explain it to clients and how powerful this process can be. You've had a nightmare and you wake up and the first thought is, oh boy, just a dream. Mm. And then you start saying to yourself, oh, I don't want to go back to sleep again. I don't want to have that dream again. Now, every rational, logical part of your brain is screaming at you. It wasn't real. It didn't happen. But you're still afraid of it because it has left an emotional imprint in your mind. So, in hypnosis, we have access to the very same brain functionality. Now, it would be very arrogant of me to decide that I know what's right for the client walking in my door. But I can facilitate them leaving the emotional imprint of their choice so that their brain knows what is the emotional experience I want to take into competition. Well, to simplify neuroplasticity, what you mentally rehearse and what you physically rehearse in training, what your mind becomes conditioned to, and the neural pathways you establish is what the mind repeats in competition.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that is really the essence of what we're doing and what you're doing there in sports hypnosis.
Absolutely. It's conditioning the mind to repeat what I've done in training. in the very same way that I expect the muscles to repeat what I do in training.
Yeah. In summation, Aidan, of what we've been talking about here, if there was 3 or 4 points that you could just give us, bullet points that would help, a sports aspirant or somebody who is big into sport.
Imagination, belief, be open to new beliefs, and finding the optimum emotional level for the individual for competition. That's huge.
Great stuff. And just shifting gears slightly, if there was one thing that you could change about the hypnotherapy world, what would that be?
Even though we all mean incredibly well, and we know what we're capable of helping clients with, as a profession, we haven't actually managed to properly show other mental health professionals what hypnotherapy done properly can do, and how the emotional change that can be achieved very quickly by I always tell people it's not about hypnosis, it's the quality of therapy that happens after hypnosis takes place. And we are all very well trained therapists, but we still haven't got the message out that it's about therapy, not about hypnosis. Hypnosis just gives us access to that emotional state, and that's when the real change happens.
Yeah, and it's rapid access to that emotional brain, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. As we all know, hypnosis is something that has to be learned.
Yeah,
and the more somebody practices hypnosis, the deeper they go, and the more impact the therapy can have on that emotional state. And I just wish, as a profession, somehow we could get that message out.
And I think by being professional and, by using what would we call research that's available to us and implementing that and to back up our practice is the professional way of moving forward, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah. Yes.
Now, if there was any advice, Aidan, that you would give to somebody who is starting out in the hypnotherapy profession, what would that be?
Advice would I give? Believe in your training. Believe in what you're capable of. Be patient. It does take time to build up a practice. Don't get disheartened. And do believe in yourself, but give yourself time.
Yeah. It's like any profession. It becomes it's a skill and an art, isn't it? It's developmental.
Absolutely. In my early days, I know I made mistakes.
Yeah.
But you are the professional. They are coming to you. If I have a couple of minutes, can I tell a quick story about when I started out?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was about 3 months into the profession, and I got a phone call from a lady, and I won't go into too much detail, but I said to her, when I'm working with a client, I will always take 20 minutes to half an hour to give them a chance to get to meet me, but I'll explain about hypnosis, hypnotherapy, my approach, and answer any questions they have. So I said to this lady, do you want to book an intro chat, or do you want to go ahead with your first session? And she said, no, book me in for the first session. I know all about hypnosis. And I said, oh, where did you train? And she said, I'm a psychiatrist. It was part of my basic training.
Oh, yes.
And she told me where she worked, and I kind of figured out, I hung up the phone and I figured out that she must have to be in the position she's in, along with her 14 years study, that she probably had about 20 years experience as a practicing psychiatrist. And I started to panic. Here's me starting out in my career, and I thought, if I make any little mistake, this lady will see right through me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Career over, reputation ruined.
I won't give you my response to that, but anyway.
But anyway, I rang a friend who had been in the profession a long time, and I said, you're not going to believe it. I'm in panic here. I'm after getting an appointment from a psychiatrist.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And he said, so? And I was taken back. And he said, well, why is she coming to you? And I explained, and it was it was a bit of a phobia.
Yeah.
And he said, well, with what you know about self-hypnosis, self-analysis, would you be able to resolve that for yourself? And I said, yeah, I would, of course. It was nothing major. And it was something she was future projecting that may or may not happen. So he said, well, there you go. That tells you that you know more about hypnosis than she does. She's coming to you because she can't do that for herself. You just heard the word psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And you put her on a pedestal.
Absolutely.
So he said, I want you to do some analysis on yourself for the next few days and be ready to take that appointment. So anyway, I did, and I came to an outcome for myself that was quite positive. And at the end of her second session, when we finished up, I ended a trance, and she started to laugh. And she said, boy, I thought I knew about hypnosis.
There you are.
There was the answer.
Absolutely.
Anybody starting out, believe in what hypnotherapy done properly is capable of achieving.
It's a wonderful, wonderful juncture and a wonderful time to end this podcast. So, Aidan, how can we contact you?
Through my website. In fact, I have two websites. aidansloan.ie or sportshypnosisdublin.ie, and you'll get all my contact details there.
And your surname is spelled Sloan.
That's right, yes. And
So
it's
Aidan Sloan.
AIDAN, just like yourself, Aidan.
Yeah.
aidansloan.ie.
aidansloan.ie. Wonderful.
Sports Hypnosis Dublin is on Facebook. I do have a Twitter account. I have an Instagram account, but I have to be honest, I'm really not active. And in fact, during COVID, when I should have been more active, I have been less active.
Mm-hmm.
But
great. Well, that was wonderful, and I want to just say thank you so much for an inspirational and very informative and practical podcast. So that was Aidan Sloan from Dublin, and he's just given you his contact details. So Aidan Sloan, thank you so much for being with me today on the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
You have been listening to the Professional Hypnotherapist Podcast, which is a production of the European Association of Professional Hypnotherapists. That's EAPH.ie. Why not pop over to EAPH.ie and discover many valuable resources waiting for you right there, right now. Thank you for listening, and bye-bye for now.